Welcome to everyone if you've just joined us to the Friday WSA webinar sessions. Really looking forward to this talk, the adventure that Ben and Ant and a few clients had in Nepal. Fantastic place to go, can't wait to get there myself one day. Just a couple bit of housekeeping rules. There's the mute button. If you could make sure if your mute button, your microphone is muted, that would be fantastic. For as far as questions go, if you could use the chat function, that would be brilliant. I know there is the Q&A one as well. It's quite difficult for me to monitor both, and I am working from a mobile phone tonight because my computer's playing up. But if you could do that, that would be great. The presentation is scheduled for an hour. Fire through any questions that you have. Probably you fire those towards Ben and Ant at the end of the presentation, but you can send them through at any time. So it's over to Ben. If you'd like to give us a quick introduction, Ben, and then over to Ant, and then we can kick off. So thank you very much. Enjoy the show.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Ben. I'm one of the WSA team, one of the trainers and technical advisors. I also manage the Whitewater Centre in Cardiff, and my passion for stand-up paddleboarding is in SUP surf and also guiding SUP holidays, expeditions in wild places. And as part of that is training other coaches and guides in those areas. So that's a little bit about me, Ant.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, evening, everybody. My name's Ant. I run Adventure Consultancy. My background is 30 years in the outdoors, really, from running outdoor centres and expedition work. Adventure Consultancy now is predominantly a training provider for programs, especially abroad in other countries, developing bespoke programs, and expedition work, expedition logistics for medias and groups. Which is kind of the link between how Ben and I connected. We knew each other before the trip and connected to put this trip together.
Excellent, guys. That's, thank you very much for the background there. So I guess the question to start this presentation is, why Nepal? How did it happen?
Well, we thought we'd start off by giving you a bit of the backstory to how we both ended up managing and guiding on this first SUP trip ever to Nepal. I started kayaking at about age 17 and spent those early years in the company of people like Stuart Wagstaff, Mike McDonald, and Phil Bibby. And at the time, these guys were sort of leaders in expedition kayaking, especially in the Himalayas, with first descents of many of the rivers. And I couldn't sort of help be not grabbed by the stories they told and the pictures. So it was kind of the next step, really, to go and experience it for myself. 1993, I put together the first expedition of Welsh students at that time to travel to Nepal. Basically, I had no idea what I was doing at all, and it was totally blagged the trip. But at the same time, just absolutely fell in love with Nepal, and year after year, interspersed with a few different places, Siberia and some other countries, just kept returning to Nepal, kayaking, and just absolutely fell in love with the country and its people. Following a few issues with my back, saw the end to my kayaking career, and about 10 years ago, found stand-up paddleboarding. And it really saved my my paddling career, if you like, and my enjoyment of paddling. And as part of that was always that sort of itch that I had to maybe not go back to Nepal to paddle some whitewater, but certainly go back and explore the rivers that that didn't have the whitewater, that weren't very often travelled in those times. Okay, Ant?
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, very similar story, really. I went out, actually, the first trip for me to Nepal was climbing. I went out in 1990 very naive, very inexperienced in kind of altitude and that kind of thing, and went out to climb a couple of peaks in the Everest region and failed dismally due to altitude sickness and not acclimatizing properly. But what I did do while I was out there, being also a paddler, was, you know, up in the mountains, I ended up looking down on the rivers, wishing I was down on the rivers. And that's something I've had a battle with for 30 years now, is every time I go to Nepal is I want to be in the mountains and the rivers, and I kind of keep swapping it around. I then followed that climbing trip the following year by going back paddling and kayaking out there, self-supported trip, a handful of us out there, meeting some of the rafting companies that were just being established at that point. So the subsequent years after that, I was getting work as an employed guide. So I was going as a raft guide to work on commercial trips and things like that. That then led to me regularly going back, and similar to Ben, interspersed with other countries, I kind of kept being drawn back to Nepal. And I suppose through this presentation, you'll probably work out why we both kind of love the place and keep going back there. After kind of spending a number of years as a commercial guide, I also then started an adventure travel company. So I ended up taking clients there for trips in the mountains and on the rivers. And I ended up partnering a riverside resort for 3 years with a Nepalese partner and an American partner. And we started developing training programs for Nepalese guides as well as for the river. And that's really, I stepped out of that partnership because I wanted the flexibility to continue that development of kind of guide progression and training courses out there. So for me, it's been a 30-year journey backwards and forwards, predominantly twice a year. I was telling Ben earlier, I think I've added up about 4 years of my adult life has been spent in Nepal. And I joke to my wife that my local barber is in Kathmandu. I seem to get over there more for a haircut than I do here. An interesting little story, actually. This picture, when Ben asked me to send a picture through, was this was my first kayak trip out there. We caught a bus. We loaded the kayaks onto the bus, got off the bus at the nearest point, and this was to get up to a river called the Modi Kola, which is a tributary into the Kaligandaki, which is the trip that we did on the SUPs. And the story behind this picture is this chap was trying to carry, we had 3 kayaks and he was trying to carry all 3, and we'd arranged a rate with him, and they were loaded. So they're like 20 kilos each, and there was no way he was going to carry them. And I kept saying to him, look, we'll get another guy, get another porter, and he kept disagreeing with me. In the end, I worked out why. It was because he thought he'd get less money. And we negotiated, and I said, no, I'll pay you the same amount of money if we can get another porter to carry the other kayak. You can take the 2, we'll get another one to take the other one. And he disappeared about 2 minutes later and came back with his wife. And his wife became the other porter. And I thought, you know, that for me portrays the Nepalese. And the men and the women are used to carrying stuff out there, but it was just that ingenuity and quick thinking and going, if I've got to go and get someone, I want to keep that money, and they don't earn a lot out there anyway. And that, I suppose, was my first of 30 years of haggling with the Nepalese, which is a cultural thing really out there. Haggling for things becomes part of the day-to-day living out there as well. So yeah, that's my kind of background with Nepal, and you know, as I say, I call it my second home now. Cheers, Ben.
Yeah, so between the pair of you there's a vast amount of experience and some epic stories, no doubt, to come out of your adventures to Nepal. Question I'd like to ask is, how did you source a location? What made you choose the actual river that you did? Maybe if you could zoom in on the area there for us, Ben, to show us exactly where you were paddling.
Yeah, I think we'll come on to that a bit later, but primarily, as Ant's already said, I mean, so Nepal is obviously well known for its the mountain range of Himalayas, and you know, highest peak in the world, and also its river systems, which are probably the best whitewater in the world, you know, hands down. And whilst we back in the day in the 90s, you know, early 2000s, we were traveling there to go whitewater kayaking. We we knew that there were long sections of river that were that didn't have white water and weren't that well traveled. That maybe a few fishing trips a year, but mainly kayakers, rafters, mountaineers went there for challenge, white water, big peaks.
Yeah, I think the picture there in Nepal, if everyone's looking at it, probably everyone obviously knows where it is in the capital, Kathmandu. It's kind of sandwiched between the Tibetan plateau and India. And obviously, as many of you will be aware, that Tibet's kind of been squeezed now, and it's commonly known as China. And even on the modern maps now, they've kind of been pushed out of their own country. So you've got this high plateau, and then it really, Nepal's got three very different environments. It's got its high summits, which everyone's aware of, the Himalayas, that run across like a corridor across Nepal, and they link to either side to India, Ladakh, Bhutan. And it's actually one of the corridors that a lot of the wildlife, highline wildlife, will move between the countries at that level. And then as you come down to 4,000 meters, you kind of lose that snow line, and you start hitting what they call the kind of high jungle area, and then coming down to the foothills. And then the foothills really then just run completely out, and you can actually kind of see on that bottom end of Nepal on the map there, that it literally flattens out completely as it hits what they call the Terai and the Indian plains as such. So you do, as you travel through Nepal, go through a massive amount of variation and diversity in landscape. And equally you do in the rivers, because all of the rivers run north to south, obviously from the highest points downhill into there. So when you do a river journey in Nepal, you definitely see these different environments you get to travel through, and different climates as well, I suppose, in different areas. One of the interesting things coming up at the end of this year, I suppose, is the fact that I kind of refer to it as being 100 years of exploration and adventure. It will be 100 years at the end of this year since George Mallory attempted his first climb on Everest. His successful one was 1923, but in 1921 he was there. And that's kind of become what Nepal's been symbolized for, this adventure capital of the world, I suppose, with the highest peaks and the best rivers. And it has got such diverse variation. And another reason why I go back, there's so much to see and so much to do there. Ben?
Yes, I think it's probably worth mentioning some key and some fun facts about Nepal. The common greeting and thank you is namaste, where hands are together, and maybe a little tip of the head. It's also available on WhatsApp and Instagram as well. So nice to see everyone's keeping up. It's the birthplace of Buddha. It's got the densest concentration of World Heritage sites, and a lot of those heritage sites are in and around Kathmandu, and then they sort of spread out across the country, whether that be Kathmandu or the old city Bhaktapur. Well worth visiting in their own rights. As Ant said, it's bordered by Tibet in the north and India in the south. It's got the world's highest mountain, Everest. And if anyone's saw a picture I can't remember which paper it was in, but Everest has been seen from Kathmandu this year for the first time since cameras were invented. So Kathmandu sits in a valley. It's very dense smog there certain times of the year. And I guess with COVID, no planes flying in, the Nepalese people locked down, same as us, no transport on the streets. There's been no pollution in the valley. So quite a big thing for Nepalese to be able to see that. Population of around 27 million, and 741,000 million people then live in Kathmandu and the Kathmandu Valley. And certainly since Ant and I travelled back there in the 90s to now, it's really noticeable how much that valley has spread out to sort of the outlying hills. Certainly when you fly in or fly out, you can really see that. 125 ethnic groups and castes, and a lot of those castes and groups will have a particular surname. Gurung is one particular one, and obviously that's a lot of castes for one quite small country. Average earning for half the population is $1 a day, and I think that puts into perspective. Certainly, there is a high level of poverty in Nepal, and obviously an extremely low income. Life expectancy of 57 years old on average, and it says 81% of the population is Hindu. A lot of people think that the majority religion is Buddhism, but it's actually Hindu.
I think one of the things Nepal struggled with, obviously one of the biggest income and economic generators for it is tourism. You know, paying for the peak fees to go up Everest and the permit fees, and that's a massive thing for them. But they've not had it easy in doing that as well. In the last kind of 30 years, they've had a really tough time. Certainly, traveling there regularly through kind of the late 90s, there was a kind of an insurgence happening with the Maoists that kind of ran through right till 2006, where it kind of heightened with a civil war and the end of the monarchy in Nepal. And that process that saw a diminishing of the tourism right through to kind of 2006. Numbers were going down. People weren't sure about going because there were kind of lots of conflicts going on. And then in 2006, the tourism just dived because, you know, civil war, government not really in a good place to do anything there. They just started recovering for that, and you know, over kind of 2010 and 2011, tourism numbers were building again. And then I'm sure, as many of you will know, in 2015, April 2015, Nepal was hit by a massive earthquake. It happened to be on a Saturday, which means that no children were in schools and most people were at work and most people were outside. So it impacted a region called Sindhu-Polchak, which is northeast of Kathmandu. And ironically, it's the area that I had the resort in. It's the area that I call my second home. And I brought the guides up there, and I was sent a picture by one of the RAF guys who was kind of 17, and it was just him sat on a pile of rubble, which was his house. 2 days later, I was in Kathmandu. I jumped on a plane to go out. I felt compelled to kind of go and see what we could do to help these people that for me had given me a great, you know, 20 years of friendship, really. And I suppose, where do you start? When you see pictures like that, where do you start? And the easiest thing was, again, explaining the way the Nepalese people are. In a rural community, I asked that question and I said, look, where do we start? And without any hesitation, the community pointed at the first house that needed to be built. It was a lady that lost her husband and a child, and they had already started building that house, forgetting their own and doing that. So I kind of got involved. I felt it was something I needed to do. The bottom right picture was actually a school that I built in 2010 through the funds of running trips to Nepal. And I met these children and promised that I would build them a new school. And in effect, that's what we did after the earthquake. And for me, the earthquake was two phases. One was an economic recovery. How can we get money into Nepal and help them? And that was quite simple. Come back to UK, start a registered UK charity, start a non-government organisation in Nepal. We, within about 3 months, using the client base of people that have been to Nepal and understood it, and using media and film, we raised £75,000 and managed to rebuild a lot of the communities, water supplies and schools. We built 5 schools, including the one that I promised, and it's something I'm still involved with. And I suppose the biggest thing for me about that experience was I feel that we have a duty when we travel to places like this, that it's not just about what we take away in terms of memory and experiences. It's what we can leave behind as well in a positive feedback to that environment we've worked in, whether it's the location, whether it's the guides. And that's something I've always believed, and you know, I still support those schools out there now. The hard part of that, I suppose, was then once it goes off the news, where does the money come from? So it was important to get the tourism back to Nepal. So, and in a way, that's where this trip came from. 2017, we took the SUP trip. And in a way, that was a way of kind of, again, generating some tourism, saying to people it's okay to go back there, it's safe to go back and explore a little bit more. For me, still to this day, that's probably setting up that charity and running that is the thing that I'm probably most rewarding and most proud of, and it's something I'll continue to do. And I think that's the ethos of WSA and ourselves as part of this trip. You'll hear us talking about training the guys and things. It is what we can give back when we go there, not just what we can take away. Ben?
Okay, so the trip in 27 started and finished in Kathmandu as a best, where we met the clients and headed out to the river. Kathmandu in itself is well worth visiting. It's just simply an amazing city, and we've got a short clip here just to give you some a little bit of perspective on sort of the differences and maybe what to expect in Kathmandu.
Okay, so moving on to the river itself, it's as it says there, the source comes off the Himal Glacier in Tibet, up on that Tibetan plain, and it actually comes down through one of the deepest gorges in the world. And I suppose it's not, people always think it's the Grand Canyon. Well, it's got very high sides, but when you think of a gorge, this has got Dhaulagiri on one side and Annapurna on the other side, at both 8,000 meter peaks. And this river's kind of carved its way right the way through the middle of this kind of mountain range to make this kind of the world's deepest gorge. From source down to the kind of confluence, it's 630 kilometers and ending in the Ganges. And there's, volume-wise, we kind of measure it in cubics. It's roughly about 250 cubics. So it's a very large volume river, really, on the section that we paddle. By the time we got to it, you've got all these other tributaries coming in, and it builds up to this big, wide, open, beautiful area for us to go through. Stunning wildlife as well. It's well known for its fish down there, big catfish. It's 250 birds species in Nepal, an abundance of butterflies, monkeys, and all of these are alongside the river as you go down. So it is a stunning trip. And obviously going through the villages as well. Going through villages that aren't used to, certainly aren't, that section of river, as Ben said, not used to seeing many paddlers on, because it's not a white water river. It's not what a lot of the tourists do. So it's stunning going through some of these kind of untouched, unspoiled villages on the way down. What I am going to do now is just read you. This is the guidebook for whitewater Nepal, and it's got this river in it, and it's got a lovely little introduction really on the lower Kalikandaki. It calls it a big but relatively easy river with beautiful, unspoilt scenery, small gorges, jungle, and an abundance of wildlife. Recommended as an easily accessible and relaxing river trip. A good trip for small inflatable boats like duckies or for kayakers with limited experience. A classic, best of its kind trip that deserves to be more popular. And I suppose that kind of sums up why it was a choice for us to go there, really. It had all the ingredients of not just the water, but the environment that we were going to be traveling through. I suppose the one thing that does change out there, and it doesn't matter how much you look at the guidebook, is it's a very changeable country in terms of environmental impact. What we tend to have is monsoon hits from kind of May through, and it can change a river. It can wipe out rapids, it can cause landslides that create new rapids. So every time you run a river out there, and it was the same with this trip, even though you've got the guidebook, you're running it as if you don't know what's around the next corner. So you're running it with a little bit of caution, but a little bit of respect is the word, I think, as you go down. One of the biggest changes, I suppose, to the river since Ben and I first went out there is the fact it used to be, and to 10 day long trip, because you started higher up and finished lower down, but a dam's got in right in the middle, basically, of the Kaligandaki, as it says there in 1997. This dam was produced, which means you can't run it as a continuous river journey. Above the dam is now a white water section, and below the dam is this stunning environment that nobody really goes to very much. I think, Ben, you're going to mention a little bit about the damming process in Nepal.
Yeah, I think so. As Anne said, the volume of the river is measured in cumecs, and a cumec is cubic meters per second. So it hasn't gone without notice that the volume of these big river systems in Nepal have been identified for hydro schemes. And it's really sad to say that there's only one large river system in Nepal that we as we understand it, that's left without a dam on it, certainly, or one that hasn't got a plan to be on it, and that's the Berry in far west Nepal, which I paddled back again, probably 97, I think 98. So yeah, it's very sad. The other sad thing about it, or unfortunate thing, is the Nepalese sold the land of the dam to Indian government, and the Indian government built the dam. They then shipped the electricity off to India, and then Nepal have to buy back that electricity. So it hasn't, you know, as you read it, it hasn't really done the Nepalese any good at all, apart from, you know, ruining an amazing ecosystem with wildlife and superb fish life, which travelled right up to the upper sources. They've also kind of been stung as well on having to buy back electricity. So quite a, you know, criminal, I guess, in some in many ways. So we sort of get back to the trip that we ran. So the expedition or holiday, whatever you want to call it, starts in Kathmandu, and we fly on the biggest plane ever across the foothills to Pokhara, which is Nepal's second city. It's absolutely fantastic on a big lake surrounded by the Annapurna. We take a bus and drive into the start of the river at Ramdi, just below the dam, which we've mentioned. And from there, then it's just a wonderful 6-day river trip all the way down to Devgat, where we get out of the water, and then on this trip we took a bus back to Pokhara for some R&R and a paddle on Fua Lake, which is under the Annapurna. So days on the river. This is one of the first days, and most of the group there. It really is, you know, absolutely fantastic to, after quite a bit of traveling, to be on the river. The kit we use are sort of shortish standard SUPs, which we flew out there courtesy of O'Shea SUP. He donated it as part of a project that we were working on, which Ant'll go through later on. Everything was, all our kit, etc., was for white water touring, or moving water touring, I should say. So buoyancy aids and helmets. We were questioned actually a few times about helmets, but because we need to comply with local and national safety guidelines, anyone paddling under a rafting company in Nepal has to wear a helmet, which obviously we complied with for the whole trip. It's no hardship, especially when you're paddling in warm water with board shorts on and a t-shirt, having to jump in the water to cool off or fall off every couple of minutes. So I guess 6 days on the river, once you set off, and the noise of the road, you just leave that behind, and you just enter this amazing, just meandering class 1, flat to class 1 river system. And it just meanders its way through the foothills of the Himalaya. It's absolutely stunning. Time to reflect and chat. The water does keep you on your toes. There are little class 1 rapids that pop up every now and again. the odd bend which you have to negotiate and guide through. Again, the scenery and the wildlife is just absolutely spectacular. You know, white sandy beaches, buffalo, monkeys in the trees, eagles, vultures, and just some absolutely phenomenal bird life. So all in all, that, you know, each day is once you're on the water, super relaxing, really, really nice, gentle, fun paddling, just with the odd thing to just keep you on your toes, which I think is what's needed on a trip like that.
So yeah, daily river life, it's kind of tough, as you can see from the picture there. It is a place where you naturally can relax as well. The days on the river aren't designed to be full on long days at all. They're going to give you time to soak up the atmosphere that you're in. Most mornings tend to be early mornings because the sun's up and the light's there and everyone gets up. And equally, most evenings tend to be, you know, it goes dark fairly early and people go to bed, and you know, so it's an early start and kind of early to bed environment to experience as you go along. It's got, I suppose we get up, we kind of have our breakfast, and I've got to say the food is very good. So that's part of it. When you're out there and you're doing exercise every day, the food is just, you know, prepared so that you've got fresh stuff as well. And that's the one thing the guys are really experienced at, packing food in an order that it can come out and be generated. And, you know, you're producing spaghetti bolognese and garlic bread and things like that on the side of the river for food. And so, you know, you kind of have breakfast and then you start packing up your stuff to load onto the rafts. And, you know, this participation is part of the trip. You know, all the trips that I do out there, and certainly a river trip like this, it's all about participation. When you kind of come on board something like this, you're part of making it a success from the start to the finish, really, and being involved with that whole process, whether it's, you know, helping chop some vegetables pre-meal time, putting some tarps up or some tents up and things like that. And we just encourage, you know, as a team, you make this expedition, this journey, cohesively together, really, by all having an input and a part of it. And that's really important, I think, when you're out there. It kind of draws people together. You're normally off the river. Lunches, you know, you kind of have longer mornings, and then lunches tend to be more of kind of a buffet style lunch, just laid out on the beach, and then back on the river for a couple of hours. We normally kind of get into camp around 3 o'clock in time to put the tents up, or tarps. You can see the tarps there on that picture. Some love that way of just sleeping out under the stars. You know, it's really warm out there, as Ben said. You can see from the pictures everyone's in shorts, so it's not cold at all at the time of year we go. And then there are tents if people prefer tents and that privacy side of things as well. And then once you get to set up your beach, it's time to just relax. And, you know, it's all about talking about the day on the river and, you know, a game of cards, sitting around a campfire. Has been known to have the old rum punch as well. So, you know, it's all about that relaxing and getting some energy back and enjoying that environment. Just, you know, having a little wander up and down the bank where we're camped. And quite often you'll see some of the village people maybe upstream or downstream and things like that. So it really is, I suppose, that for me is, my wife always jokes that I sleep better under a tarp than I do in the bed. And I do. I think that environment of just being out there is part of the trip. It's not just about being on the river. It's this whole sandy beach, beautiful scenery, with a group of great people making the trip happen. Ben?
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things. There are no fixed campsites or anything like that. We don't, you know, the beaches aren't pre-chosen. So towards the end of the day, we kind of decide maybe stop within the next half an hour to an hour. And as you float down, you just wait to choose sort of the best beach, I guess, that you can find and you fancy spending the night on.
I suppose if we're talking about kind of who goes on the trip and what the options are, when we put the trip together, we thought it was really important that, you know, people might not be experienced or know what they're signing up to in a way. So to have options when you're on the river was really important. So on every trip we take rafts. We take rafts for carrying the kit. As you can see there, we're going really light with the SUP. So the rafts are carrying everything from the personal kit to the tents. And at the same time, you've got the option, if you want to jump on the raft and chill out on the raft for an afternoon, just jump on the raft and chill out on the raft. You know, if there's a little section of water that you kind of think, right, there's a little faster class one or whatever, I'm really not happy with that, then you could just jump on the raft. And equally, partners, you know, joining the trip, that was the whole idea of this being, you know, it's not something you've got to leave your partner behind. They can come, you can enjoy the supping, and your partner can, if they want to just sit on a raft and enjoy the scenery. And my wife does that every time. She just sits on the raft and takes the photos and loves it every time. So I think that was the whole idea of running a trip out in, you know, an expedition in Nepal, is to have that flexibility. And that's kind of what we try to do with this trip as well, having options. Ben?
So I think for both Ant and I, and I guess anyone who's sort of travelled there and certainly on this trip experienced it, one of the main reasons for just returning time and time after to Nepal is just for the Nepalese people. They're just absolutely a phenomenal race. They're just generous, funny, happy, and above all everything else, just really kind, thoughtful people. Whether you're in the city, whether it's Kathmandu, Pokhara, or some of the old towns on the road traveling, and certainly on the river, you just feel safe the whole time. I've never in the years of traveling there felt uncomfortable or threatened at any time, and that includes sort of female travelers as well. You know, my wife was with me or with us on this trip, and she said the same. You know, everyone is just so friendly and kind. Because this river is not paddled that often anymore, certainly from the dam down. It was sort of almost like going back in time to the early 90s, where running rivers was quite unique. And when you came across a village, the young people and even some of the older people hadn't seen a lot of Westerners pass through there. So one of the great things was in the evening after we set up camp, the villagers would wander down, sort of, you know, have a poke at the stand-up paddle boards, pick the paddles up, and just you know, have a look about, you know, what on earth was going on. You know, people stood on these boards floating down the river. Ultimately, it would generally always end up with, you know, some laughter, discussions, maybe a game of volleyball. The Nepalese are pretty hot at volleyball, certainly the youngsters. So yeah, more often than not, in the evening before dinner, we'd be entertained and do some entertaining ourselves with either trying to explain about stand-up paddleboarding, or certainly get thrashed in a game of volleyball by the locals.
You can see a rather loaded raft there. So that's our gear raft with one of the guys sits on and floats down alongside us as we're going with all the kit on. And that's got everything, food, kitchen stuff, you know, loaded, ready for us. And these guys are our characters. They make the journey for us as well. And I think, you know, for me, taking trips to Nepal, it's all about integration with the locals and learning from them as well. And the river industry has changed over there. It's developed massively over the 30 years I've been going. And when I originally went, a lot of the first rafting companies and river companies in Nepal were Western. They were Western fronted, I suppose. They had to have a Nepalese partner to technically run a business there, but they were fronted very much by a Western company and Western guides. And equally, my first kind of employed guide work out in Nepal was working for other companies. I'd go out and do seasons, and I'd be taking a Western guide, taking Western clients down the river. And that has changed, which is great. I think what's happened over the years is some of those very early Nepalese raft guys have gone on to set up some amazing businesses now, and what they're doing is inspiring the youth that this is just like the Sherpas are known for going up the mountains, that these guys, river guys, are really experienced and really good at what they do. And I suppose the shift now is the fact that we've got, you know, Nepalese companies running rafting to Western standards. And that's the great progression that's happened, I suppose. These guys have learned from what was there early on and really understand the kind of standards involved, whether it's the food, the equipment, the safety, and developed along that process as well. And I know, you know, Min that runs Paddle Nepal is a good friend of mine, and we use his team of staff for this to take the rafts and help us outfit the trip, and they do all the food and things like that. Here's a good example of one of the guys that started as a kitchen lad very early on in the kind of river industry there out in Nepal, and that's the normal process. You start as a kitchen boy, you then become a safety kayaker, then you'd aspire to be a raft guide, and then you would aspire to be a trip leader. And that was kind of the ultimate to go, right, I'm in charge of this whole thing now. And it's great to see that this program is happening in Nepal of developing now the youth out there. And I suppose that's one of the things I've been heavily involved with. I started running trips out to Nepal, and I started running guide training programs for Western staff. And then I kind of went, this is wrong. You know, why are we running training for Western people in Nepal, and the people in Nepal aren't getting the Western training and the qualifications and the standards? And we're working a lot with the companies out there now in giving them, you know, recognized certification in rescue and things like that as well. I think the other thing that's massively changed, and I've seen it, I suppose, in the last 5 years predominantly, is the cleanup on the rivers. And this has been purely down to some of these rafting companies totally understanding that this is their responsibility to kind of lead the way on. I used to, you know, have a joke that the river systems were Nepal's version of recycling. Most of the villages would send their rubbish down the riverbank and wait till monsoon, and then it would just end up in India, and it would be India's problem. And that was the process that was happening year after year after year. What's great to see now is the rafting companies and the young raft guides understand the importance of keeping this environment really clean. And they're really promoting that on all the trips. They're also promoting it. One of the best ways to do it, another raft guide friend of mine, what he did was basically start taking the locals rafting. Come and have a look at what you're doing with your rubbish. Come and have a look at the impact. So he would take the villagers from the local villagers rafting, and he managed to persuade them to change their ways. And over a 5-year period, Nepal has massively cleaned up its rivers, and that's down to these raft guides. And I think that's the emphasis of all of us that work on the rivers. It's our duty to pass that ethos on and to promote it as much as possible, even down to, you know, they were chucking leftover food in the rivers and things like this on the raft trip. They've really cleaned it up now, and they're very proud of the rivers that they work on, which is great. And I think, Ben, you're going to follow that up.
Yeah, I think it's quite a nice story to tell, really, about this picture. And the guy in the picture is Gopinder. He was the trip leader on our expedition holiday, and his story was that he was brought up in quite a remote village on the side of a river called the Sunkosi. The Sunkosi is quite a famous river. The Dudkosi flows off Everest, and then that flows into the Sunkosi. It's one of the classic whitewater runs in the world, one of the best. Really great 10-day whitewater trip. His mum used to sell bits and bobs of food and some sweets to the visiting Western raft trips and kayakers that used to pass through their village, or sometimes camp on their local beach. And Gopinder was telling my wife while she was sat on the raft there on the bit of blue tarp for those long days on the river, that when he was a young boy, he used to go down with his mum, and every time he saw a trip come through with a Western raft guide, or he used to really aspire to be that raft guide one day. So it was a really nice story to know that when he grew up, went through school, ended up working, as Anne said, as a kitchen porter, cook, safety kayaker, raft guide, and then has ended up as one of the most one of the company's most experienced trip leaders. So really nice story there. And just to finish off on sort of Anne's explanation of some Nepalese raft guides. I took a call earlier on today from a friend of mine who flies out to Iceland in a couple of days to be a safety kayaker and work on some photography things for a raft company. And that raft company is headed up by a Nepalese raft guide. So that, you know, Iceland's quite some serious white water there. And there's some of the best guides, whitewater raft guides and trip leaders in the world.
We kind of said earlier about, you know, the options when you're on the river of jumping on a raft and things like that. I suppose quite often people will ask, well, who's it kind of really for? What level and what type of people have we got on the trip? And I suppose that a trip like this is designed for people who are happy in the water, first and foremost. You know, falling off and climbing back on your SUP is part and parcel of that trip. And really, it's not about necessarily having done rivers before, but having that basis of you know, intermediate skills. It's a great place to cross over. And as I said before, you've got long flat sections, you've got some shorter, faster sections to learn on. So really, it's kind of, when we put it together, it was designed as being something, you know, if a competent paddler, you can just go and have a great holiday. But equally, you've got the likes of Ben on board and WSA who have got that coaching ability to develop yours. And I think that's one of the things we were very keen on doing on the trips, is it's not just about standing on the board and going down the river. It's about, you know, gaining new skills and applying those skills in new environments as well. So crossing over those skills. And you may see in a couple of pictures coming up as well, we mentioned the rafts. We also take safety kayakers. And that's standard practice in Nepal, that the safety kayakers go down. You know, normally if somebody falls out of a raft on a rapid, they'd be there and things like that. So we decided we were going to do that on this trip as well, so that, you know, those safety kayakers would run to the bottom of the rapids, and if somebody let go of the paddle or anything like that, we've got a really easy way of just maintaining a really nice, safe trip down the river there. So, yeah, mixed abilities and lots of options when we're on the river. That was the key, really. Ben?
So this this image is from the last but one day, and the sun was going down, and we hadn't long come out of there's a gorge section sort of right at the end of the river, and the gorge section has got 3 class 3 rapids in it. So it's not a whitewater trip, so we decide that we portage, so we walk around those rapids, which is an absolute adventure in itself. It's a real gorge, it's steep-sided with a little raised beach and some boulders which you can portage around. It's hands-on, you really have to help each other out, pack some kit round, and help each other around each rapid. You can paddle a little section in between one of the rapids, and for us, it's kind of part of the adventure of a multi-day river trip, that at some point, you know, we knew it was coming up, we'd been there before, we knew we could portage each rapid. So it was a great bit of fun one afternoon, and also watching the raft and the safety kayakers run those rapids, because they're more than capable of class 3. So it was great fun. One of the things that is outstanding in that gorge really is that they are extremely steep, steep sides. The rock wall falls directly into the water. And if you look up, you can see the effects of the monsoon. So there's no vegetation growing for, you know, 100-odd foot up in the air. You can see the scars on the rock where the water's worn it away with trees and other boulders. So it's quite a humbling experience being in that gorge, taking it all in and trying to imagine what it would be like in the monsoon. But certainly one of the highlights really of the river is that gorge and the feeling you get in there, and then sort of popping out of the other end, ready for a night back on the beach. So as you come out of the gorge, this is looking downstream. You'll see the foothills that we paddled in for the last 6 days were dropping away, and they drop away to the Terai region, which is the flat area which Ant has spoken about. The river that we were on, the Kaligandaki, meets another river called the Trasuli. And then eventually the combined river of the Kaligandaki and the Trasuli flow into the Ganges. So both rivers and obviously the Ganges are quite very holy rivers. So it is absolutely fantastic to end up coming out of the foothills onto the flat area, the Terai of Nepal. Quite a different day's paddling at the end. It was quite exciting back in 1993. A young lad leading his first trip came out of this gorge. The gorge was there as well in 93. We were a couple of hours out of here, and on the bank we were amazingly lucky to see in 93 a gharial crocodile, which they're a freshwater crocodile. They're fish eaters. They don't eat people. They've got a long snout with like a tennis ball in the end, at the end of the snout. At the time, I wasn't thinking it was an amazing experience. I was paddling for the horizon, but it was certainly, looking back, one of the greatest experiences I've had paddling rivers in Nepal. Unfortunately, nowadays, and it may be due to the dam, but those crocodiles are rarely seen. Whether it be due to fish stocks, and they certainly don't come up into the area that we were paddling, and certainly they're not seen very often where we get out. So the video doesn't play very well on Zoom, unfortunately, but we've got a little a short clip just to give you some idea of sort of the feeling of life on the river, and basically run through a day of paddling through from the morning into the evening.
And that's our group at our exit point on the river, on the confluence. The confluences are very holy places as well. You normally get a temple on the confluence, so it's great. You just pulling up to this very kind of peaceful area. You've completed a fantastic trip. You can see actually there that the mountains have disappeared really from the previous photos as we get to the Terai. And as far as we're aware, that is the first, well, we know it's the first stand-up paddleboard descent of the Lower Kaligandaki. And I think at the time it was the first multi-day trip in Nepal that had happened on SUPs as well. So an amazing experience really to just kind of, be part of that and share that with the team that came with us, including the guides. I think it was quite a unique experience for the Nepalese guys who had never really seen a SUP, let alone been on them. They couldn't help but jump on every opportunity really and have a go as well. So I think for all of us, it was quite a unique experience. And I suppose just finishing off, we kind of mentioned that you know, part of the reason of going out there wasn't just to run the trip. It was we got the boards were brilliant. They were sent through from O'Shea. Those boards stayed out there. That was always the plan for the SUPs to stay there. The lad who was back to us in blue is my son Dan, who came out with us on the trip. He's a WSA coach as well, and he decided he wanted to stay out a little bit longer than us, and he ended up running the workshops that we kind of wanted to happen there with the guides. So it wasn't just the guides that were on the river with us that got that chance to do that. So a lot of the guides based in Pokhara or Paddle Nepal had their first kind of coach sessions on SUPs as a way of starting that process off for them. And he ran some workshops over a number of days there. And the idea is, this is something that we want to continue really, is you know, helping them not just sourcing the kit, which is very difficult out in Nepal, but also that development of, you know, the young RAF guides to be able to take this forward, take it forward safely, and take it forward as a, you know, for other people to experience in Nepal. And you'll take from that shot, it's a pretty stunning place, and you know, to be able to paddle on Fua Lake under the Annapurnas there is a great experience. And that was something we did as part of the trip as well. And you know, if we do a trip again, will happen again, is the fact that we, as Ben mentioned right at the beginning, we went from Kathmandu, took an internal flight across to Pokhara, and then had a day there with a chance for everybody to go and have a paddle out in this fantastic setting prior to us going on the river. And then we kind of do the full circle back round to Pokhara afterwards. So I think it's kind of an important thing for us to kind of keep that momentum going. We had planned the trip in 2020, this autumn. Ben and I got plans with WSA and Adventure Consultancy to do that, but we felt obviously for obvious reasons right now is not the right time, and morally it wasn't right to run a trip out there, or to try and push to run a trip out there at this time. So that's something we've decided not to do. But what we have decided when talking with Ben today is they're going to be in exactly the same situation now, Nepal is, in the fact that, you know, post-Maris, post-earthquake, where, you know, when do people go back? When does their main income come back to the tourist industry in Nepal, which is what it relies on? So we are planning on putting one on for the autumn of 2021, and we'll be doing our bit again to get SUPs and setting up some training programs for the guides and continue what we started. The aim was, it was going to be a progression of, as we said before, not just going out and leaving again, but going out and doing something positive while we're there as part of that process. Ben?
Yeah, I think that rounds it off really, Ant. I think sort of everything else about just under an hour. So I guess we're if there's any questions, Chris, we're happy to take them.
There's a few questions coming in, but I just want to say how inspiring this has been watching this, and what a fantastic initiative that you guys have started there in putting back. I mean, so often these in this day and age, we see people just go in and don't give anything back to the community. And I truly think, as our audience will probably agree, that was one of the most inspirational talks that I've witnessed, to be honest. So well done. Question wise for you guys, just some of our audience are asking, what was the total length of the trip from you know, from arrival to leaving? How many days?
Number of days.
Yeah.
Do you want to take that one, Ant?
Yeah. So the trip, when we ran it in the autumn, is 6 days on the river. We ran it in 6 days on that trip. It's about 125 kilometers of the section that we ran. You know, we actually said today that if we run it again, which we're planning to do, we will probably add a day just to allow us more time to be there, to be honest. It's really just, you know, as I say, being on the river is one thing, but being in that environment is also just great fun to you know, have that experience. So 7 days, 125 kilometers downstream, obviously. Yeah, great.
And just the overall trip. So we'll meet you, or in Kathmandu, so you fly into Kathmandu, and then generally the following day we take an internal flight in the morning across to Pokhara. Great views of the Himalayas out the right window as you fly across, which gives us a full day in Pokhara to paddle on the lake, sort some kit out, and then that evening have a meal together. The following morning we depart then on a bus to Ramdi, which is a private bus, just for us. Drive, I think it's about a 4-hour, 5-hour drive across to Ramdi, and then as Ant says, we're on the river for 6, will be 7 days next year. And then from the end, then we will go back to, the plan is to go back into Pokhara to have some of the afternoon there, maybe paddle again on Fewer Lake. And then we think it's really important then to have a couple of days, maybe a day or two in Kathmandu, just to take in the sites. Well worth visiting some of the UNESCO World Heritage sites, and then fly home. Or there is an option. My wife and I stayed on and visited a few other areas which are really special just outside the city. So yeah, it can be done as a 14-day, 10 to 14-day trip.
Excellent. And how do people find out about the trip details then, Ben?
So what we'll do is so tomorrow evening, we'll post out an email just saying thanks for watching, and we'll put some information, contact information in that for the 2021 trip. As Anne says, we don't feel morally right in pushing a trip to Nepal, taking a load of people from all around the world into an area with limited healthcare, and it's not right to do this year. So 2021 it will be the next trip, November. Okay,
and so all those details you'll send through, and I guess it'll be on the WSA website as well. There is the Nepal video on there that you made, so if you want to check that out, guys, check that out. Just a couple of other questions. I'm conscious of time again. People are asking, what about kit? Is that supplied by you guys, or do people bring their own kit? How does that work?
So go on, Ant.
No, you go on, you can go.
So if people are paddlers and they've got their own kit, so they've got their own helmets, buoyancy aids that they're comfortable wearing, then absolutely we're more than happy for you to bring your own. We do quite a long lead into the trip, so we discuss what kit you're bringing, just to make sure it is suitable, and if we can point you in the right direction if you are going to buy it. Boards wise, we pay a small fee back to Paddle Nepal for looking after those boards, and obviously they get to use them. But if you wanted to bring your own board, again, we just have that discussion with you before we head out there. In terms of the camping kit, so whether you choose to sleep in a tent or under a tarp under the stars, that's all supplied. So you just have to bring a lightweight sleeping bag and a mat with you. But to be honest with you, if you didn't even want to do that, those can be purchased in Kathmandu very, very cheaply.
Excellent. And just sort of distances again, if you could just remind us, what sort of distances are you covering each day?
We don't tend to measure it as in kilometres each day, really, because each section of the river is very different. And I think Ben said that we kind of have a rough plan of where we want to get to, but there's so many options of staying on sandy beaches and things like that we really play each day as it goes, and how everybody's feeling in a way, and kind of go, well, do we want to finish earlier today, or should we go a little bit further? So we're kind of averaging, I suppose, about 4 to 5 hours on the water, and that's not just constant paddling, that's floating as well, and that's kind of the measure of it. As I say, we kind of early morning starts, stopping at lunchtime. We're normally on the river by about 9 o'clock, packed up, loaded, had breakfast on the river at 9, stopping for lunch, and we're normally off the river. We aim to get off the river at 2:30, 3, which allows us then time to just get the camp up and relax. So yeah, it's always hard to gauge distance out in Nepal, because the river changes in it's really quite big down the bottom and quite slow as well. So but an average 4+ hours a day.
Okay, great. And one thing that I noticed there, and it's quite surprised me really, because I thought the water would be cold, but I see you paddling in shorts. And so, what's the actual temperature of the water for the time of year that you go and run the trip?
Well, the air temperature is warm. You're wearing sunscreen, and shorts and t-shirt absolutely fine. Didn't get cold at all. And then you are jumping in the river to cool off at some points, and the water's warm. It's not, it's kind of lukewarm, if you like. I don't know the actual temperature, and then off the water in the evening, you would quite happily go for a swim or have a wash in the river. It's it's certainly no hardship. It's not cold. Very, very comfortable.
Yeah, it's quite surprising. I really did think it would be pretty chilly, but looks fantastic there with the outside air temperature as well. I guess at the time of year you go, requiring sunscreen. So yeah, epic adventure. I just want to make a little comment here that someone's asked. It was anonymous actually. Is there any way that others in the SUP community could get involved with this initiative of helping the Nepalese community? How do they find out about that? I guess that's a question for you, Ant.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been a challenge, really, getting things set up in Nepal. It's, as you say, getting kit out there, getting the training done and things like that, and the points of contact. I suppose where I've been lucky is that 30 years of knowing the companies and working with them and acting as a kind of a support system for some of the companies as well, in terms of getting the stuff there and training the staff. So I mean, in terms of getting involved, they will openly accept any support, help and things like that anyone's willing to give, whether it's time out there, volunteering. As Dan, my son, did, he decided he wanted to stay out there and do something afterwards. And that happens regularly on trips I do, actually. People want to kind of go get involved. Ben will be emailing out details. So, I mean, if anyone wants some advice, I'm really happy to do that over emails, and he'll pass on my email if anyone wants to know how they can get involved out there, or any companies to contact, or any volunteer work, that kind of thing. So do just get in touch, not a problem.
Yeah, great. So look out for your emails on that one, guys. Couple of questions just coming in as well. I think you did mention this, but experience for the trips. How much actual paddling experience do we need before going on a trip like this?
I think if you're coming on a guided trip like this one, then we ask people to be at an intermediate level. So you're not a total beginner. You've paddled a reasonable amount. You're comfortable on a board, being stood up, because that's the main thing, being stood up for a couple of hours in the morning, a couple of hours in the afternoon. And it is a dynamic environment, so it's not a flat lake. It is moving all the time, the river. And Himalayan rivers are big in volume. So there's a lot of water moving around sort of underneath you, even though it's not white water. So you need to be comfortable stood on sort of a moving board, and you also need to be comfortable falling off, because at some point we all fall off. And I think just to be able to fall off and climb back on is obviously, you've got to be able to be happy doing that. There are sections of white water, as we mentioned, in the gorge. And then during the trip, there are some bends which we need to negotiate and guide. But we've got 2 or more very experienced guides on each trip, depending on the size. Every single piece of rapid, if you like, class 2, no more, can be got out and walked around, or there's always a little chute that you can take just to avoid anything major. But if you're an intermediate paddler, confident with your paddling, happy falling in the water, you should be absolutely fine. And we can talk to people about that if they're interested anyway. I think it's worth mentioning, if you are traveling, you're thinking about traveling on your own, it's Nepal is not a developed country still, even though the city is big and a lot of people there. The areas are remote, and if you did get into difficulty there, it's quite a serious issue. So whilst we're not, we don't really want to directly push a guided trip, but we would say, please, seriously consider doing a trip on your own. I mean, Ant's experience there, my experience, and also the guys there, it's probably worth going out the guided, I would say, first of all. It probably won't cost you a lot more anyway, so certainly worth it.
Yeah, I've very valid points there. Is there an opportunity, Ben, to explore each day off the river when you're off the river, or is it base camp, food, relax, and getting whooped at volleyball?
Yeah,
properly whooped. Ant, do you want to answer that one?
I think that's what we were discussing today, is just adding this other day onto the trip. Is, I'm a big fan of reminding people when they go to places like this to have time to stop and look around. You can get so focused on just that action, that activity that you're doing, that you actually kind of miss a lot of the stuff that's there. So yeah, that having an other day added on, making it a 7-day trip, will allow us to get to camps a little bit earlier, and then just, and it's great to just interact, as Ben said, with the villagers. They're super friendly. You can walk into some of the villages. We don't obviously encourage people just wandering off on their own. We do want them to come back to camp and things like that and not get lost. But certainly it's a safe environment to be able to do that and go, look, there's a little village over there. Let's go and have a wander and see what they've got. So yeah, definitely, it's something I'd encourage. The best part of Nepal, if you haven't already got it from Ben, all the years I ask people about trips, it does have the highest mountains. It does have some of the best rivers, but the best memories people have of Nepal is normally the people that they meet when they're there. So having time to interact and see that for themselves and is really important. So yes, is to that question, there is time to explore.
Yeah, and I think it's probably worth adding, Chris, two things really. If you've got an interest in photography or wildlife, certainly ornithology, that is absolutely phenomenal, especially on that section of river. So it's worth a trip in itself, for that, especially photography in the city and then out on the rivers. And the other thing that we mentioned, whilst there was only one gear raft on that trip, if people were interested in just coming along, bringing partners, husbands, wives, or whatever, another raft is just really easy to put on. It's a fantastic float trip to float down, just relax, and just have a great time.
Brilliant. I'm sold. Can I reserve a space, please? Well, I think that we'll wrap it up there, guys. Hang on a minute. Julia's asking a question. All the food's provided. Dairy allergies and things like that are taken into account, I'm assuming.
The food is absolutely phenomenal. It's all provided on the river, and in the cost of the trip itinerary and the costs are on the website. But just going back to the food, it is absolutely amazing. I mean, breakfast can be anything from toast to scrambled eggs. Lunch is just a buffet of really nice fresh fruit, and then evening meals. I'm a vegetarian, so I ate vegetarian lasagna one night. I cooked chips, all stuff you just wouldn't believe you can cook on a gas stove. Is absolutely incredible.
And obviously we take all the information from anyone that's going in advance so that we can prepare for that, and it's not a problem. Just dietary needs and they're used to that completely.
Yeah, brilliant. So I think what we'll do, guys, is just want to take this opportunity to thank you both for a fantastic, inspiring presentation. So for the audience, look out for your emails if you are interested or in going on the trip or helping in any way. Look out for your emails. I think they'll be coming out tomorrow, Ben will be sending that out. Really, 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 really inspiring. So thanks ever so much, guys. More information will be on the Water Skills Academy website regarding the trip. There is some videos on there as well. So thanks once again, and we'll take this opportunity now to sign off. Look out for the next WSA presentation, which is a development session, which will be next Wednesday. And then we'll, again, Friday week, we'll be back with another webinar. So, excellent.
Thanks everyone. Thanks all.
Stay safe, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.